a good night.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. Is it here? Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Sorry for the shipping.
No worries. That's okay. Take care. See you. Snappy pizza.
To proclaim. A cult or went with another man. There is so much more I could inform you of in this case, but it would take me hours. I just felt I needed to highlight the extreme similarities of my best friend's case. I really hope that justice is done for both these poor women. Regards, Deborah.
The following month, a woman living in Tasmania, Kim Marshall, emailed to tell me that her half-sister, Bronwyn Winfield, had been missing since May 1993. When we spoke on the telephone, Kim told me that it was a homicide squad cold case, but it had gone very cold. Kim told me back then, in late 2018,
I carry this load each week and have an obligation to try harder to find her body. I truly believe her body can be found.
At the time, Chris Dawson remained a free man, enjoying his retirement near the beach on Queensland's Sunshine Coast. But he and the criminal justice system were under enormous pressure from the teacher's pet and listeners who had heard damning evidence of the system's failure. Failure not just for the absence of justice for Lynn, but for never even investigating a culture of grooming and sexual exploitation of Northern Beaches high school girls by teachers, including Chris Dawson at that time. New witnesses were coming forward to talk to me in the podcast in 2018. Some new witnesses were going straight to police with evidence about Chris and Lynn, her 1982 disappearance, and a ring of teachers who had pursued high school girls. There had been a lot of damage caused. It finally culminated in homicide squad detectives arresting Chris and extraditing him to Sydney to be charged with Lynn's murder on December 5, 2018. Over the years since, my folder of Bronwyn Winfield files grew steadily. Bronwyn's half-sister Kim Marshall and others who knew the Lennox mother of two girls stayed in touch. I heard from a woman called Fiona Husner, who, as a child, lived next door to Bronwyn for years, near Cronulla in the Shire, south of Sydney. We met in Brisbane in early 2019 at a bar called Felons to talk about the case. Fiona, who was very fond of her neighbour and babysitter, described what she called secrets and mystery in relation to Bronwyn's unexplained disappearance. I sent a note to Bronwyn's brother, Andy Reid, using Facebook Messenger. I wrote, I've been interested in possibly investigating the disappearance and suspected murder of your sister Bronwyn. A number of people who knew Bronwyn have urged me to do a podcast investigation similar to the teacher's pet into the probable murder of Lynn Dawson. I understand that you have extensive files and reasonable suspicions about what happened. It's not something I could start without full cooperation from you and other members of the family. Andy and his wife, Michelle, were immediately interested. We met in a cafe in Sydney and talked about a future podcast investigation. A woman from Ballina called Kerry McLean got in touch to talk to me about her conversations with Bronwyn's daughter, Crystal, who had lived in Kerry's home for some time. You'll hear more about it later in this podcast series. At my request, Andy Reid and his wife Michelle and Andy's half-sister Kim Marshall started to track down relevant paperwork, transcripts from the original inquest, notes that they had taken at the time, and police statements. Old articles about Bronwyn's case, whenever it featured in the local newspaper, the Northern Star of Lismore, were collated. In 2021, I drove to Ballina and the home of Glenn Taylor, a former Newcastle Homicide Squad Detective Sergeant. Here's a little of what Glenn told me back then as extreme rain flooded the northern rivers and low-lying areas of New South Wales. He told me that his connection to Bronwyn's case began in 1998 when she had been missing for 5 years.
Andrew Reid and Michelle Reid came to see myself and another detective in Ballina and said, look, can we have some fresh eyes look at this? We're just not happy that this is going to be left as a missing person. We think there's more to it. And then when we started looking into the matter, I mean, as a homicide investigator, it was abundantly clear very early in the initial re-investigation that it needed a lot more work done and then a lot of formal statements.
Glenn had transferred north from Newcastle's major crime unit to be a detective in the coastal town of Ballina. When he heard about Bronwyn, he was intrigued and then suspicious. Like Damien Loon in Lynn's case, Glenn said he smelled a rat, but the trail had gone cold. The odds were stacked against the seasoned former homicide squad cop when so little had been done by other police in the 5 years immediately following Bronwyn's disappearance.
I still believe that it was in the senior officer's mind that this woman had in fact just voluntarily decided to leave. It was fairly haphazard, the investigation. There was very, very little done. There was no statements ever taken from any particular person, like neighbours. I mean, absolute critical areas, like there was no forensic investigation of the home, there was no forensic investigation of the motor vehicle that Jonathan Winfield had taken within hours of arriving back from Sydney at the marital house. And over the years, I think there was only initially a few inquiries done, and then it just fell back to a missing person and nothing further was done. Until many years later, I treated it as a major investigation and strongly suspected that Bronwyn had been murdered.
Yeah, your statement's very detailed.
Well, they need to be thorough. We're talking about the likely murder of a person, so they need to be thorough.
Did you believe that Bronwyn would leave her children and stay away at any stage?
All the people we took statements from in the re-investigation, all Bronwyn's friends and close associates, she absolutely adored her children. There is just no way that she would have left those children that night and not come back to the house. She was just so attached to them. She was seeking sole custody of both the children. She was a very, very good mother, according to everyone that we spoke to. It was just absolutely...
Benim o hangi türlü? Sulbaş.
And are we going to do the chorus in 5 minutes? Or just keep the same chorus?
to just walk out and leave those children right at any further contact. It just wouldn't happen unless you just couldn't prevent it. That's why it was extremely suspicious.
And why was that not a view that existed in the police in 1993 when she disappeared?
It's really difficult to say. Police do get extremely busy with other matters. Unfortunately, there's still other things happening with robberies and break-and-enters and sexual assaults and so forth. But it should have been highlighted to a commander to say, look, we believe there's something more sinister in this. We need more resources put into this. But for one reason or another, it wasn't done.
When we first met at his home, Glenn urged a podcast investigation and he pledged his full support. But I didn't have time then. Chris Dawson was waging a legal battle against the teacher's pet, me, and police when Glenn Taylor and Bronwyn's family and friends were quietly talking to me. Chris Dawson made a high-stakes bid to avoid a murder trial altogether. He said the publicity from the podcast series meant that he couldn't get a fair trial. He was also arguing that a shoddy original police investigation after Lynn first disappeared had prejudiced his prospects in any trial. But his bid to evade justice, again, was ultimately futile. At the end of his murder trial, the Supreme Court's Justice Ian Harrison delivered a verdict in late August 2022.
Christopher Michael Dawson on the charge that on or about 8 January 1982 at Bayview or elsewhere in the state of New South Wales, you did murder Lynette Dawson. I find you guilty.
I met Matt Fordham for the first time that day in the Supreme Court in Sydney. Matt came to watch justice unfold. Better late than never. Investigating Lynn's 1982 disappearance had led me to Carl Milovanovich in December 2017, and Carl would open the door to the 1993 disappearance of Bronwyn Winfield. And that's why I'm driving in northern New South Wales in 2024, 31 years after Bronwyn kissed her 2 girls goodnight and put them to bed in an unremarkable house on Sandstone Crescent, the house that John built. His castle, Bronwyn's prison.